4 products here. The first is the GH5, which we'll touch base on in great detail. The second is its grip. So I want to make sure everybody understands that your GH4 grips do not work with the GH5. So it's a completely different architecture. The second piece that we're talking about is an XLR audio adapter. So I want to get this out of the way now so we can discuss it. This piece will get its power from the camera's battery, so you don't need any external power solutions anymore, which is what he needed for his system. The audio adapter will record, it effectively captures analog here, converts it to digital here, and then it injects it through the pins into the camera. So there's no cable connection that has to come from here to the camera. It's all done locally. It can power your phantom powered microphones directly from it, and it just pulls power right from the battery. It can record up to 96 kilohertz 24-bit audio. So that's double the audio of what he's using on the GH, on his YAGH adapter. The key here is you have to record MOV files to do that. The H.264, the MP4 variant we're using, our MP4 won't do anything higher than 48. So that shouldn't be a big deal. Every video editing software can work with that.
So question on the audio, it's still 2 channels, not 4 channels,
right? It's only channel 1, channel 2. So you still get channel 1, channel 2.
Still very good.
You get all your analog level controls here. So I think it's a great accessory. I think it's a much better solution for what people are really using the camera.
Yeah, the latest Zoom, which is H2, I think 64. The only difference is they have the same 96 kilohertz at 24-bit, but they just have a 4-channel. But that's the only difference, you know.
So this will be $399. The grip will be $349, I believe.
Can you still use the adapter with AVC HD?
Oh, I'm sorry. This? Yes.
Okay.
You can use it with
just
everything.
can't record it at 96.1.
Right. You're going to be limited to. It's effectively going to be Dolby Digital audio in AVC HD. But yeah, it absolutely works.
That is Dolby Digital audio?
And AVC HD. And AVC HD. So there's different video codecs or wrappers. The wrappers we're using are AVC HD. That's going to be limited to Dolby Digital. I think it's like 384 kilobits per second. So it's a pretty compressed audio format. Then you have MP4, which is limited to AAC audio, which is the stuff you use for your iPhone, iPod. And then the LPCM audio for MP4 and the MOV. Those will be true LPCM audio. One of them will be 48 kilohertz, the other will be 96. And you can switch between 48 and 96 in the camera's booth. So anyways, that's a lot of information just on the audio adapter. And then the third thing we're introducing, and frankly the lens I'm almost most excited about, there's 2 lenses I'm really excited about, are 8 to 18, f2.8 to f4, but we're not officially announcing that yet. And then there's the 12 to 60, f2.8 to f4. There's some things to note. The aperture system in this is completely new for us. So there were some complaints about the 12 to 35, and as you zoom, it creates these little changes in exposure as you're doing it. It's a micro-controlled aperture now, so you won't have any of those issues. I realize it goes from f2.8 to f4. A lot of people are concerned about that loss of light. But the reality is, in most shooting scenarios, when I'm shooting wide, I have a tendency to be at a lower exposure than when I zoom on the subject, because as I'm zooming, there's more light concentrated here. So I'm not finding an issue, and frankly, whatever changes in exposure are more than well compensated for in the actual aperture. So, I'm sorry?
Will that be power zoom?
No, this is not power zoom. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll probably never pick up a 12 to 35 again. I think this lens is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to pass the camera around to you guys so you can play with it and take a look at it. If I see someone run for the door, can you grab them?
I heard that there's a firmware for the existing Lumix lenses that would allow...
Not the aperture.
But not the aperture.
Not the aperture. You can't get, that's a completely different mechanism.
What's the price of that lens?
This one should be $9.99.
Is it a parfocal lens?
Beautiful. And you got a
It's
full
not
HD mic port. That's gorgeous right there.
What's that? It's Leica. That is Leica. Okay. So now let's talk about what everybody cares about, which is the GH5 body.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to kind of start from the front of the camera, work our way back. So it's a completely new sensor. It's a 20 megapixel sensor. Sorry, 20.3 megapixel sensor. We've removed what's called the anti-aliasing filter. Anti-aliasing filters are a device that softens the image as it's coming through the lens to help get rid of moire or artifacting. Nobody here has a really good, well, your pants would be a good example of something that could drive a camera
Stripes.
crazy for moire. Your shirt would probably drive a camera crazy for moire.
Bright buildings.
Tight patterns, things like that can cause moire issues. By removing the anti-aliasing filter, one would be concerned that we would get more instances of moire. But the way we're debarring the image, that we're actually taking the red, green, and blue components and separating them out. In the past, you would grab 2 components of green for every 1 component of red and every 1 component of blue, and that's how we would derive our color our color components for the image. We're now grabbing from a 9 times greater area before we derive each of those individual pixels, which helps us to better define what those color transitions are supposed to be. Point is, I've shot with the GH5. The moire is not a problem at all with this camera, and if anything, it's one of the sharpest images I've ever seen. On top of that, we had some complaints from GH4 users that the GH4 looked a little overly sharpened,
Yeah.
a little overly enhanced.
Without
That's been alleviated both with the debarring system and the way we interpret sharpness now. We're able to do a better job of anticipating transition points from dark to light areas. So what you're going to see with the GH5 is an image that looks more film-like
Yes.
with more detail. So the other thing that we're doing with the sensor that for video shooters will be useful is that in the past we were doing a 2:3 crop. So,
Right.
you know, the camera was punching in a little bit on that sensor. So we got exactly 4K of resolution left to right.
Right.
The new camera actually subsamples a 5K image. It's capturing a 5K image off the sensor. It's effectively capturing the entire sensor width. And then it's downsampling it to create its 4K final file. By doing this, you get a much sharper image before we write the file, and then we're downsampling slightly, which gives you a reduction in visible noise. So you're getting a reduction in visible noise because we're starting with a higher res image to begin with. But on top of that, I'm now using the entire lens area to gather light, which buys you roughly a half stop. So in our estimate, at least in my estimation in shooting it, I wouldn't really shoot a GH5 much above ISO 800. I'd go to 1600 at pinch. I'm perfectly happy with this camera at 1600. Frankly, I'm really happy with it at 3200. So GH4, yes, sorry. The GH4 I wouldn't shoot above ISO 800. Did I say GH5? Sorry. GH4 I wouldn't shoot above 800. The GH5 I'll go to 3200 pretty confidently. The quality of the image is really that good. So once we've got the image off the sensor, it's time to write it to a codec. We mentioned earlier the codecs that it supports. It's important to note we can do 60p video now in 4K, so you're now recording 4K 60. That will be an 8-bit 420 codec. We also offer 30 frame, 25 frame, 24 frame, and 23976 frame available at 10-bit 422 color. So I want to put this into language that maybe the average person will understand. 420 8-bit gives you about 16 million different color combinations to work with. 10-bit gives you over 8 billion color combinations. So what this means in the real world, where people have 8-bit TVs and 8-bit computer monitors and 8-bit computers and they don't have 10-bit stuff, is that when I start with a 10-bit file and I bring that into an editing software, and let's say that I need to maybe I need to bring some highlight information back. I have more highlight information now to be able to bring back because it was a 10-bit file length. But on top of that, let's say I want to add a vignette. So in post, this beautiful man here, I want to vignette him, so he's just isolated, and I've got a white background that's lit. When I vignette in an 8-bit file and I've got a center lit wall behind him, that wall creates a gradient. You start to see concentric circles of gradient on that back wall in an 8-bit file. In a 10-bit file, it'll be smooth because the transitions are so much tighter. So that gives me more room for me to be able to pull and lift exposure, to push the codec, and give you more latitude in post. So 10-bit is all about creative adjustment in post today. Now in the future, what this means is that we have a new generation of 4K TVs that are called HDR TVs. Has anybody heard this term?
Yeah.
HDR means that the old television standard went from 0 to 100 nits of brightness. A nit is just a unit of measurement for how bright the TV works. CRT TVs had trouble getting to 100 nit. These LCD TVs and OLED TVs, they can go well above 100 nits of brightness. So we are designing a new exposure standard that gives us up to 1,000 nits of light output. So that gives us much greater dynamic range between the darkest and brightest images. But that requires a 10-bit file in this new television standard. So this camera is ready to record 10-bit today, and then you could grade it in post and create an HDR image. There will be a firmware update in July that my mom will like, because it will add something called hybrid log gamma. My mom doesn't work in DaVinci Resolve. She doesn't know how to color grade. So we will have a baked-in profile that will give you the maximum dynamic range from the sensor and conform to one of the 3 television standards for HDR, which is hybrid log gamma. This means that you can shoot stuff run and gun and have something ready to go for both standard definition dynamic range, and it's equally compatible with HDR TVs. So you have one project, 2 equally high quality images.
So would that eliminate the need for vlog?
No, there will still be use for vlog because this is a baked-in look. There will be.
You say it's got the whole range.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has the range the way that the artists will intend it to look. So for run and gun work, it'll be perfectly fine. But hybrid log gamma adds a knee at the base. So a toe. Hybrid log gamma has a toe below about 20 IRE. So you have a 20 IRE to 0 IRE toe. This is to hide noise in the shadow area for standard dynamic range TVs. All right. Once we get beyond 20 IRE, we go to a logarithmic gamma profile above 20 to 1,000 nits. That's where our hybrid log curve comes in. So this will work on a regular TV, and you'll just have some highlight clipping, which is, you get highlight clipping now on TVs, it doesn't really change. Log gamma is not going to have really much of any toe at all. So it gives me more latitude still to work with log. Now, we could question how many people need that. That's a different topic, but there'll still be a need for log for upper levels of production.
Now, is that all internal recording?
Right, the HLG will absolutely be an internal recording. Same with the 10-bit, same with the 30, 10-bit, yeah. So the point is that this camera at $2,000 will give you 10-bit, 30 frame, all internal, with eventually a hybrid log gamma. And then we also have a 5-axis in-body image stabilization system, so the sensor is completely stabilized. So if you're going to pair this with cine lenses, it'll be a handheld cine rig that can be stabilized, which is pretty impressive.
Now, I noticed there was some OIS lenses that are pre-ordered for this camera. Is that specifically for this camera, or?
Well, our lenses will work with the Olympus system as well. They're dual purpose.
Oh.
The lenses we've announced have an in-lens stabilization as
5-axis.
Well, no, the lenses are 2-axis.
Right.
The body has 5-axis. When I combine the lens and the body together, what you'll get now is effectively a greater range of vertical and horizontal correction. So when I use them together, it's a dual IS system, which gives me even greater range of correction, only with Panasonic.
With Lumix lenses. So would that mean my old?
That's not stabilized.
Right. No, the body is not. Neither is the lens or the body in this.
Right.
The lens is this. I have a 14-140, which has the OIS. This 7-114
has no stabilization.
But now, because I'm going to employ it with a GH5, will it then
be stabilized?
Both. It'll be 10.
It won't be dual IS.
It won't be dual IS.
There's no stabilization. So.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But you'll get stabilization in the body with that lens. With the new lenses, you get what's called dual IS2. Just greater correction range, so it's even more steady than dual IS. But the point is that if you use our lenses, you get a greater range of stability.
Okay.
But if you don't want to use our lenses, let's say you're using Cine Glass, or maybe you're a Canon, you're adapting over from Canon. That's a common use, and you don't want to immediately make an investment. Well, you'll get some stabilization, especially with like your 24-70, which probably isn't stabilized, or your wide primes. You'll get stabilization in your camera. And frankly, our stabilization for video is far more advanced than what you're getting in any lens.
Wow. And
so some people will ask, well, why is the in-lens not 5-axis? Well, one of the axes is roll.
Right.
It's a circular lens. No matter how you turn it, it's never going to change itself. It's always going to look the same. So I can't do that roll. I can only do that with a sensor. The other thing is yaw. Well, if I change yaw in a lens, that's going to create, pitch and yaw is going to create really funky look. You're going to have like half the image will be out of focus one way while the other half will be out of focus the other way. The only way you can do any in-lens correction is on 2 axes. That's it. In body, we can do 5 axes because we have all that additional range of movement. So
we're going to lose some cropping in there, right?
No, not at all.
Not this.
Not at all.
Not on the GH5.
So keep something in mind that when we designed the Micro Four Thirds standard, we designed it to have 5-axis in body as a part of the system. Olympus was the first to do the 5-axis system in Micro Four Thirds. It was designed from the ground up so that every lens was oversized for the sensor. So the sensor can move outside of its range and still be under the circle of light that the lens is pushing under the sensor. So yeah, there'll be no cropping. Now, there's crop options that then add an electronic stabilization on the sensor as well. So you can have an E stabilizer with 5-axis, within lens. That's a lot of stabilization. I don't think many people will use it.
What would that entail? I mean, would that just make it even that much more smoother?
Yeah, but it'd be
Talking about
1080. But it'd be
jumping
1080
jacks?
video. It'd be like 1080 video. But I don't know how much smoother it is. I mean, I've played with it a little bit. Truth is, it's steady. It's plenty steady enough on its own. So, okay, so that's. So we talked about 10-bit. Sorry, it kind of went all over the place there.
The SD cards, yeah, you notice you got 2 slots.
Yeah. So once we've got the file, so you'll have access to something called vlog, which is a logarithmic gamma profile, which gives you more dynamic range for production and post. For today only, for pre-orders, only a Sandy's camera thing. Peter Preston, who's the account manager, has decided that he's going to offer free vlog to anybody who pre-orders
awesome.
today. So if you want to pre-order, he'll do free vlog with it. Now it's time to write the file. So we'll have 2 SD card slots. They're both exactly the same quality. They're UHS-2 slots, which means that you can have video relay from one to the other and you'll get a seamless transition. So if you run out of memory card space on one, it'll seamlessly transition. Or you can assign things. So let's say you're a video shooter and you also want time lapse. I can assign my time lapses to one SD card. I can assign my video to the other SD card. Or I can do 4K photo to one. I can do JPEGs to the other, and then RAW to the other one. You can basically combine it in just about any way that you need. Some other cool things about the SD card slot, and frankly, one of the most useful features of the camera no one's talking about, is the ability to be able to store your camera settings to the SD card or to your smartphone.
Carbon copy.
So the app now adds Bluetooth Low Energy. BLE is a constant connection between the smartphone and the camera. This means that I can force the GPS data into my images. This means that I can also pull what my picture settings are on the camera and store them on the phone, and not just one setting. As many as your phone's memory will hold. You can have profile after profile after profile stored on that phone, and then just change them. So let's say I'm on a project, and there's a photographic component, so I want a photographic setting, and then I'm doing some anamorphic workflow, so I need an anamorphic setting, and then I need something in 180 frame per second because I'm doing some slow-mo work in this production, and then maybe I'm doing some epic wides, so I need to have the 16:9 aspect ratio for it as well. So I've got all these different looks. I can save each of them to the SD card. That will be the same card that I'm writing my files to. So I have one project, everything is here. And then I can just quickly on the fly make those changes, and I can hand it to other GH5 operators, and they can load those settings as well. I think that's a terrific feature of the card that nobody is talking about, and I use it all the time. You can also rename your folders and files. So your DCIM folder is where your photos and videos go. Once you get to the DCIM folder, it's usually like some cryptic 100 dot something. Well, you can name it now CES 2016. So, I'm sorry, let's go forward in time. CES 2017, because that's what we're just at. So I can have a folder that's my CES folder from when I was doing run and gun work. And then I can have board, which is the project that Luke Newman worked on. I can have board as a separate folder. And I can have those files go to those places. And then I can rename the first 3 digits of the file. So if I'm doing a CES show, what I would do is I'd put SOB for Sony booth. I'd put PAB for Pana booth. That way each of my clips has its own file structure, so I know what they're named. Point is, there's an unprecedented level of organization in this camera. Yeah, so it's a very cool camera for workflow efficiency's sake. Does that answer the memory card questions enough? Oh, it also requires, UHS Class 2 cards are not required, but they're recommended. We're going to do a firmware update. Remember I told you that we have 4K 30 at 10-bit? That's a 150 megabit codec, and it's what's called an IPB codec. I'm not going to go into how an IPB codec works because I don't want anybody to pass out and bump their head on the floor. If you want to know how an IPB codec works later, I can explain it to you as a one-off. But the point is, it puts a lot more processing power requirements in your computer to edit. So initially, if I just put on a timeline, I'm going to cut it up and maybe add a text overlay. IPB codecs work with most computers that are 3 years old or newer. No problem.
What kind of card?
UHS-2.
How much the biggest card size you could put in
Up to
there?
2 terabytes, but we
2
haven't certified
terabytes?
them. We haven't certified them to 2 terabytes. Let's just be clear. We have not certified to 2 terabyte yet. But every one of our XDHC cameras will always be able to do up to 2 terabyte. We just can't certify them until cards exist. So back to what I was explaining though, which the heck was I? Because I just got like a
You're on
huge
SD
interruption.
cards and you talk about the
Okay, so when I do IPB, let's say I want to add color corrections and some stabilization on top of what I'm doing. All of a sudden you start to get drop frames when you're doing your video edit. Well, we're going to have in the summer a firmware update that's going to add something called an all-intra codec for 10-bit 422 color up to 30 frame. This is going to be 400 megabits per second. So that's about 15 seconds per gig of data. But this means it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for you to edit when you put it on your timeline. So again, thus far, in-body image stabilization, 10-bit video, and all-intra codec. Now let's talk about 1080. So in 1080, we're obviously going to have a 10-bit. This is the funny thing, though, just a little piece of information. The camera will not ship with a 10-bit 1080 feature. It won't do 10-bit 1080. Anybody else think that's kind of weird? It would be like the easy one to do. It was a total oversight. So it's going to be added hopefully sometime in April. There will be a 10-bit 1080 option.
So that means when you do your 180 frames per second.
Well, look, I was going to get to that. So we're then going to give, we're also going to give you now a slow-mo up to 180 frames per second. And it goes from 50 megabit codecs to now 100. The quality of the 180 on this blows the doors off of the GH4. It makes the GH4 look decidedly bad in comparison.
That's crazy.
I've seen it directly against the FS7.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll put it day to day against an FS7, and I'm not embarrassed by its quality
But
at
not
all.
in high ISO. Not with-
Yeah, I'm just talking 180 FPS.
okay.
That's all we're talking about. So at 180 FPS, it has nothing to be ashamed of. Now it's an 8-bit codec, it's 420. You don't have as much work to play with. But let's go again down the laundry list of what I'm providing you for $2,000. 10-bit 422 internal recording, 5-axis in body. Now you're also getting 180 FPS. Why don't you go down the litany of cameras that are out there and tell me what camera you would have to buy to get that feature set that I've just named for you now with a sensor remotely close to this sensor size. It's the FS7. That's the only logical competitor to this camera. And I can buy 5 of these for the price of one FS7. So it produces a decided price point advantage over any other camera in the market for video production. And on top of that, I haven't even mentioned the fact that it does anamorphic in what's a correct anamorphic medium, which is a 4:3 aspect ratio. So I have this camera here.
This is where I'm interested in.
So right now I'm using an SLR Magic. It's a 2x anamorphic lens. So I want to show everybody what I'm seeing on the screen right now so that you can see what I see. Alright, so this should look very flat and dull. And where you're sitting, it should look very blue.
Is it V-Log?
Yeah, so right now this is a logarithmic gamma. This is a very flat picture profile. And if I set my focus, say about that, that's good enough. Okay, so what an anamorphic lens does is it takes and compresses the image as it comes onto the sensor. It squeezes it 2 times narrower, and it stretches it 2 times taller. So it makes things look 2 times skinnier and 2 times taller than they are in real life. The reason we used to do this was back with film. People were watching television, people were watching movies, and they were in a 4:3 aspect ratio. Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. Anything in the 30s through the 50s was in a 4:3 aspect ratio. Pretty much everything in silent pictures was 4:3. That was the de facto aspect ratio. And I know the nerds in the audience are going to say, well, Matt, it was a 1375 to 1, not a 133 to 1. It's close enough, okay? So we used a 4:3 aspect ratio, and then all of a sudden these TVs came out, and people stopped going to the movies. And Fox said, we need to get people back in the pictures. How do we make a bigger movie? How do we make the movie look bigger and more impressive on the screen? Well, one option would be to take our film cell, crop it, then just blow it up on the screen. And then all of a sudden you'd have very little film grain and you have this big grainy image.
Back in the 50s, right?
Instead what they did is they took an anamorphic lens, which squeezed and compressed the image onto the sensor. Once I've squeezed and compressed it onto the sensor, then we would project it back out an anamorphic lens, that would stretch it back out again, and I get all the film grain in a bigger presentation. But who cares? We use digital sensors. Why do we want anamorphics today? Well, anamorphics give us 3 unique characteristics. One of them I can't demo in here because I just don't have the light source. First, the bokeh, the defocused areas in the background. When you defocus a lens today, they're circular, right? When you see them, they get big bokeh balls is what they call them, right? Anamorphic lenses will give you a cat's eye shape to your bokeh. It will have a very oval look to it. The second thing anamorphics do, which I think is the most important criteria for anamorphic or its benefit, is the amount of compression. So this is a 50 millimeter lens. So on this camera, it's the equivalent of 100 millimeters of perspective compression. I'm bringing you 100 millimeters closer to him when I'm framing my image. It makes things look more densely packed. But I still get 50 millimeters of angle of view. So I can still get like a 3 shot with 100 millimeters of compression perspective. That's unique to anamorphic. And the third thing, and I want to make sure I de-squeeze. So what we do is we record this 4:3 aspect ratio. It's recorded on the sensor. You go into Premiere, you go into Final Cut, and you de-squeeze it. We stretch it out. And once we've stretched it out, and we apply a color correction to our log footage, now we've got a properly de-squeezed, fairly, well, crappy color, but that's the TV.
That's the monitor.
And we get our
flare.
J.J. Abrams lens flares.
There it is. Yep.
So anamorphic lenses are what are used to produce those elongated lens flares. So I want to make sure everybody understands where anamorphic pricing was in the digital world up until this camera. Okay?
10,000 up.
You were buying either an Arri Alexa XT, which is like $60,000+, to get a 4:3 actual native capture. Or you're using cameras like a Red Epic, or you're using an FS7, I'm sorry, not FS, F55, F65. And you are cropping the Super 35 sensor to 4:3. And they have a crop mode in it to do this. And I'm losing resolution. So the only one that really didn't lose res
65.
was the XT. The XT would make it a bigger capture. All right, so you got more density by using the XT. This camera uses the entire sensor height and width. It's 13 millimeters tall. Anybody want to guess what the height of an F55 sensor is? 12.7 millimeters tall. This is a bigger 4:3 anamorphic capture area than an F55. This is equal or really close to the 13.6 millimeters of height you get on like an F65 or what you're getting on an FS7 once you've cropped. So we're all on the same page with this. This is one of the biggest anamorphic capture windows out there. It also captures 3328 by 2496 of height. It's also one of the highest resolution anamorphic. And then there will be a firmware update
In June, right?
sometime in the summer that will get you a high resolution anamorphic, which is 5K wide. It's 4997 wide by like 3760 tall. It is, without going into some of the really high res red product, it's the highest resolution anamorphic you're gonna find, along with the size of the sensor being as big as anything cinematic other than the XT.
So you're using PLs.
So,
You can absolutely use PLs, but I'm using a native mount micro four thirds lens on here right now.
That's anamorphic.
Yeah, this is
They have a
this is
native,
made
yeah,
by a company
SLR.
called SLR Magic. They make 3 focal lengths. They make a 35, a 50, and a 70. They're native mount micro four thirds. And yes, they vignette on the 35 a little bit to the edges. But keep in mind, we're at a 2:6:6 to 1 aspect ratio. you're going to crop to 239, which is the exact same thing we do with the Aerial XT. It's the same thing you do with an F55. You're going to crop to 239. Once you crop, the vignette's gone. So that's not a big issue. The point is, that's a $2,000 lens to $2,500. To do anything anamorphic with modern glass right now, it's $20,000 an optic.
Cooks for 30,000.
Yeah, so we're talking about a camera that sells for $2,000, that for $8,500 you can have a set of 3 anamorphic optics. For under $10,000, for right around $10,000, you have a full anamorphic production set. Nobody else can provide you that at this price point.
The other thing too is you don't have to have an anamorphic lens. You could still shoot 4x3 open gate using spherical lenses.
Yeah, so one other use for the sensor, because we're effectively 4x3 aspect ratio. And in the future, you'll be able to do 18 megapixel files per frame. So imagine that you're doing stunt coordination. Well, if I'm stunt coordinated and it's a car that goes driving off a ramp, what if it goes out of frame on a 16:9 framing? Well, your camera operator has to ramp the camera up and follow that object, and all of a sudden you've got this funky, weird movement in your production. Forget that. Shoot open gate. Shoot in a native 4x3 aspect ratio, knowing you can crop later. Just keep it in framing in the 4x3 area, and then crop your 16:9 out of it. So if you're doing parkour videos, or you're doing anything skateboarding, or anything that's action, open gate is tremendous for that use because it gives you more latitude. Think about all the resolution you have to work with.
So that means you could take a Canon lens, employ the 4:3 mode, and that's would be considered open.
I can use
gate.
any. I can use any of our lenses, and they all cover the full sensors. So it can be Canon, but it can be any lens, as long as it covers a micro 4/3 sensor.
So you don't have to shoot the point is you don't have to shoot an anamorphic. I mean, you could just, as long as it's the 4:3 mode, you don't have to have an anamorphic lens. You can just, like you said.
But to get the anamorphic look, you have to use an anamorphic.
Of course.
lens. But if you, I think what you're saying is that I can use this for more than anamorphic.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can. It can be used for crop in post. Or frankly, there's a lot of photojournalists now who want to maintain the same aspect ratio for their photography as they're getting for their video. Because a lot of websites now want richer content, and they want to be able to transition from that still image where you slide your mouse over it and it becomes the video image, and they don't want to see it changing from 16:9 to the 3:2 framing. Well, you have 6K photo mode, which gives you the ability to shoot video in either 3:2 or 4:3 aspect ratio up to 30 frames per second. It maintains a 4:3 aspect ratio, and you can pull those frames as printables to huge print sizes and still have the video file that can be used as your master video file for the website. So the world's changing on aspect ratio. I don't see a standardized aspect ratio anymore. I mean, my iPad is a 4:3 aspect ratio, my television's 16:9. Who the hell knows what the iPhone is? I can't even remember. The point is that your aspect ratios are moving all over the place now. And websites are beginning to utilize different aspect ratios for video because they want it to more closely match the photos that they're putting up on the site. The camera provides you with that flexibility. So aside from that, for the photographers, we talked about photography earlier. The autofocus system in this camera is nuts. It is the fastest autofocus I've ever used on any camera.
We're talking stills now, right?
For stills, it's ridiculous.
Both.
For video, it's equally good. It's much better than the GH4. So if you're a vlogger and you want to hold the camera on yourself for a few hours and shoot yourself, it's going to work perfectly fine for that, no problems. It does a great job of tracking moving subjects. You can adjust the amount of speed and tenacity, meaning how tenacious will it lock on this subject versus allowing other subjects to come in and interrupt it, and the speed with which it transitions from focus point to focus point. But on top of that, and I need my camera back. Yes, sir.
Can you predict rack focus? Is that something that you were going to get into, or am I?
Yeah, so aside from the autofocus, which is for unpredictable movements, which we've dramatically improved with the camera, and I can't demo it here because I'm on preliminary firmware on this camera. What if I want to have a more accurate focus pull? Maybe I want, but I don't want to hire a focus puller.
Here you go.
Well, the camera, I really should put this on the right way, but I asked for a cheap tripod and they really helped me out. I'd asked for an Arcus display, they didn't have one up here. So. So let's execute a focus rack. So the camera, oh, I should probably put this out so you can see it. And then I'll close with some video content that we've shot with it so you can see some content. And I'll give you some more time to ask questions. Okay, so the camera's menu, let's put this into a video mode, shall we? So in the top movie menu, page 2, you have something called focus transition. So I'm going to first set this to medium for the speed with which it'll rack the focus. And I can choose focus pull settings. Now I'm just going to do 2 positions for right now. So what I do is I choose position 1. Actually, let me redo this. I need to, someone's got this I don't know what's going on here.
Where's Sean?
No, the issue is, I'm just going to reset the camera.
And this is the, he's saying this television monitor is the early 4K, right?
Yeah.
Not the better ones.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm just resetting the camera. So right now we're in 60p. For this
You
demo.
got it on auto white balance?
Yeah, for right now I do. Okay, focus transition. What we're going to do is we're going to program position 1, which we're going to make you. That's good now, with your glasses. So we hit exit, set. So now I've set position 1.
Peeking, yeah.
Now I got position 2. So position 2, we'll go to the back of the room. Let's just, we'll pick on those hands there that are praying. Yeah, there we go. Holding on to the gimbal. Okay, exit, set. So now what I can do is I can go to start, and I can either touch the screen to pick the 2, or I can use the joystick. I'm going to use the joystick for this. So position 2 is the back.
Yeah.
Position 1 is the front.
Oh, wow.
And go back to position 2. Now, this is at medium speed. So what if I want to do a snap focus?
Crazy.
I can change the focus speed. Let's go to super high, just so you can see that.
Great for slider shots, huh?
Yep.
Because that's the hardest thing for me, in my opinion.
So on position 2?
Slider shot.
Position 1.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
2. Position 1.
Almost instant.
Yeah. It's going to take a while, but I'll do it.
But he can do it, yeah.
Next to the slowest, not too slow.
You can either touch those buttons that I have on the screen. Here, this is super long. I can either push position 1 or 2, right from the touchscreen, or I'm using the joystick right now. Okay, so I'm gonna go to position 2. We're gonna grab a cup of coffee, and then it'll eventually get to the back of the room.
Oh, that's crazy. And it's probably, it takes off the precision of human error. In other words, it's more, the transition will be more smooth, in my opinion.
Right, and we spend a lot of time to make sure that it behaves more like a focus puller will behave.
Right.
So it doesn't have that quick snap and jerk at the end. I think what you're seeing is pretty decent. So,
Very decent.
and again, you can program up to 3 positions in the camera, so that's pretty awesome. And no, it will not work with an anamorphic lens because those would be manual focus. So, and I have not tried this yet with anybody else's optics, but I'm going to guess this is probably going to require our lenses more than anybody else's.
Because it communicates with each other.
There's a lot of communication that's going back and forth between the lens and the monitor.
Are there like plans to allow us to generate custom Bezier path or
I'm sorry?
Shot.
are there plans to give us a UI where we can make custom like paths for the focus?
Not at this time.
Really?
But you do have 3 positions that you can program. So, I mean, it's really just depth differences. It's not really where the object is. So,
But it would be cool if you could control how fast it speeds up.
yeah, I agree. Ramping would be neat to be able to adjust. No question.
So there's no issue with 4K overheating with that, right? If you use 4K all the way.
We'll record until you fill the memory cards, plural.
Never had that issue
How
3 years
battery
ago.
life?
Yeah. That's like
So battery life, that's the real big question because we're not giving out exact times. The one thing I saw was that in Australia they ran a test with the camera where they had the XLR audio adapter on it, and they got about 3 hours. I think that's nuts. You're not going to get 3 hours out of it. You'll probably get about 2 hours with the XLR audio adapter on it. We're being told about 70% of what the GH4's battery life was. That's still pretty darn good. Any GH4 shooters in here? I mean, your battery life. Do you ever complain about it?
I loved it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It goes forever.
Yeah. So the battery life, you're probably getting consistently 3 to 4 hours out of your battery life.
Yep.
So you know,
Can
2
you
to 3
charge
hours.
through USB?
I'm sorry.
Can you charge the battery through?
No, you can't charge over USB. That was one thing I wish we would have done, but they just didn't have the time to re-architect. It required some architectural changes in the PCB. They just couldn't get around to doing it.
So go back to the focus pulling. If you're on a Ronin, which a lot of times people, they're going to use this camera for video use. How would that work? In tandem, is it easy if you're on a Ronin? Like
I've never once tried it, so I would have. You're asking a guy who's never once used it.
There's an app for this, right? A wireless connectivity.
Right. So, like I was mentioning earlier, we have our app, which will work with Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and yeah, you could absolutely do the focus pulls from the app.
oh, that's crazy.
For 8-bit versus 10-bit, is the file bigger or the same file?
Not really, because it's 150 megabit encode, whether you're doing 8-bit or 10-bit at the highest quality. Now, when we get to the 400 megabit all intra,
Yeah.
that's a different world.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a negligible difference between the two.
But the intro is going to be much easier for your workflow and editing.
Yeah, the all intro will be easier for editing, no question. It'll also, all intro has one other kind of benefit a lot of people don't talk about. If I'm doing panning shots, IPB codecs have this tendency to have this surging that happens as you're panning.
Right.
And that's just within the IP. I'm kind of trying to simulate it here. I'm not very good at that simulation, but
know what you
I
mean.
think we've all experienced this
Yes.
before on a final edit. A lot of that is because of the intra-frame compression that's happening. I mean, IPB codecs, you only have really one intra-frame. You have 2 intra-frames that bookend a bunch of stuff that's fictitious data. I'm trying to make this real easy for everybody to understand, but I'll make it a little more advanced. An I-frame isn't a frame that is, all the compression is only happening within that frame. So like a blue sky, I'm repeating data to reproduce the blue sky instead of writing each individual pixel as a unique data pattern, okay? So you have an I-frame, you have an I-frame, and then bookended between that we have what are called P-frames and B-frames. A B-frame is typically going to be made up of parts of frame 1 and parts of frame 10, if that's our bookends. So you're taking some of what's in frame 1, some of what's in frame 10, building frame 5, for lack of a better explanation. Then the P-frames that are between I and B, they're not real. They don't exist. They're nothing more than vector information that tells us that that ball that was moving from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, it's literally what direction was that ball moving, what shape was that ball, and how fast was it moving. And that's all that's there. There's no actual video information there. So the point is it makes everything smaller, but it can be fooled more easily with fast motion. So all intercodecs, each frame is a unique snowflake for everybody here. That means I'm redrawing a new image for every single frame. It requires a lot more data to do that, but ultimately you get more fluid movement when you have
And
things
battery
like
power
this.
too.
It
Even at
shouldn't really
24
affect the battery
frames,
power
because
consumption too much.
24 frames, they just, any kind of panning, no one today pays any attention to the way
It
they
still
shoot.
surges like nobody. It still surges like you wouldn't believe. I mean, you get anybody who's shot in here with an IPB will tell you that you get these surges where no matter how smooth you're doing your pan, there's like this inevitability that no matter how well you did it, there's this weird surge that happens kind of toward the end. It just seems to be the case.
But your rolling shutter, your ultimate has improved dramatically on this, right?
I can demo that for you guys if you want to see it.
Yeah, please.
So I'm at 60 frame full HD. Well, why don't we start with 4K just so we can start at the top. I need to change the Remember I told you not to use the MP4 but to use MOV? I have to change that really quick. Because I need
Use
60,
MOV?
I want 60p, yeah. MOV just because you get better audio. That's where you
Better
get
audio?
That's where you get the best audio from the camera.
Is Intra more superior over MOV?
It'll be in an MOV wrapper. It'll still be an MOV, just like a Final Cut, like a ProRes file. ProRes file is ProRes, but it's in an MOV wrapper. So
You said they're high performance PC. Does it work with a Mac too? Like you said, just PC or just PC?
it'll work with Mac or PC.
That's rolling shutter, right? We're testing the rolling shutter?
Yeah, let me change the shutter to shutter angle just so that I can get to exactly 180 degrees. So I'm shooting at 180 degree shutter angle. I'm at, let's take this to 36 millimeter. It's 18 millimeter. Let's autofocus it. And let's shake it. A little bit in that Sigma sign in the back. I'm shaking this thing pretty hard. Though.
Yeah, you are.
This is like the worst camera operator in history. If I go smooth,
Yeah.
That's very good.
so if we go to 24, $4K 24. Sorry, 23976.
Yeah, right.
To be exact.
Don't want anybody to question me on that.
But you can do 24 pieces, right? Really?
Yeah, true 24. So again, smooth, zip, smooth.
Yeah.
Frankly, with the motion blur, I don't think you'll even notice the shutter roll.
I can't do that with the A6300.
You cannot?
There we start to get a, there you start to get a roll.
Who makes that?
Yeah, right.
But that's a pretty aggressive. I think we'd all say that's a pretty aggressive whip.
Yeah.
That is a very aggressive whip. You wouldn't normally do that, but I understand the point. Yeah.
And then if we were to do 1080, here's 60p 1080. Where again, now there's a lot more processing because we're having to down-res everything down. That's a smooth cam.
That seems smoother.
What?
Yeah.
It seems smoother.
Because
Yeah, it's even better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the same with the GH4. 1080 was always better. But the image is softer.
Oh.
Pretty nice.
Now, one thing I will warn you about Anamorphic, there will be more instance of skew. You will have more of it because remember you're compressing the information twice as narrow and then you're pulling it back out again. So it'll be more prevalent. There's the same amount of skew, it's just more apparent.
correct.
So nothing changed other than how perceivable it is. So that's a lot of information we just covered.
To go back with the Anamorphic, again, your field of view is still compared to like an Alexa 65, right? You still have the same like 35 millimeter.
No, it's still smaller than the XT because the XT is using an ungated 4:3 aspect ratio sensor, so that will be bigger. But when we're talking about like the typical anamorphic crops on a red, or we're talking about the typical anamorphic crop on an F55 or an FS7, or I don't think the FS7 even has anamorphic crops. So you're really looking at like F5, F65. If we're looking at doing your own crop on like a Canon, C300. This sensor is 13 millimeters tall. We're using all 13 millimeters. It's pretty easy to go out and find out what the sensor heights are on most of these cameras. They're anywhere between 12.7 millimeters on an F5 up to about 13.7 millimeters tall on a Canon C300. So you're right in the ballpark for the same height, but you got a hell of a lot more resolution for your anamorphic. So yes.
When you're recording 4K internal,
Yes.
does it output a clean 1080 HDMI?
Yeah, it can absolutely do that. So you wanted to record internal 4K and then do like a proxy file to an external recorder?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could absolutely do that. So his question was, could I output 1080 to an external recorder and then do internal, like all internal, do external 1080 in an all intra codec? So I have something that's really easy to edit on my timeline, and then it comes off the master with the 4K. Yeah, you could absolutely do that.
Would this camera fit the requirement for network? I mean, for TV and cable.
That's really up to the networks, but I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. Everything is so much different now on that side of the business. When we were at NAB or CES, executives from CBS were in the booth looking at the camera. They had absolutely no questions as to whether or not it would work for them on set. So I don't think that would be an issue at all. And frankly, what are we talking about? Are we talking about sports coverage? No, I would never use this for like trying to capture a football game. The depth of field is way too shallow for the lenses they've got to use. It would be a nightmare.
For a travel channel.
There would be no problem at all because Travel Channel has no standards whatsoever. The real question would be more about, will the BBC accept it? Yes, they absolutely will because they've been accepting GH4 for years now. So there's no problems with the BBC. There's going to be no problems with NHK. And your local networks are now switching a lot of what they're doing for news coverage. They're doing a lot of stuff with like Canon C300s for their talking head stuff because they like the shallower depth of field. They also hate a lot of what they have to go through to shoot with it. So there's a lot of interest in this for networks. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Any different in the color science on this versus the last one? The GH5?
Yes, because of the way we're debarring the information, there's a lot more color information in the blue channel in particular. So it's going to be easier to grade, no question. I think flesh tones look better on this camera, but the real area you'll notice is blues. Blue skies are so much better on the GH5 than they are on the GH4, and that'll be something you'll notice. But it's not so dramatic that you can't get them to match. So you should be able to match your GH4 to GH5, but there's just a lot more blue channel information there.
So that's part of that is contributing to it's a newer sensor, right? It's a micro four thirds sensor, but it's a different micro four thirds sensor than GH4, and the processing. The Venus, there's more processing power with this GH5.
Right. It's the processing power though that's giving us more color information though, because we're able to go 9 times greater area for debarring our image. By going out to a 9 times greater area of capture, the subtleties of gradient from pixel to pixel become much easier for us to determine as we're debarring. So
more true, more accuracy in the color.
Yeah, the color will look more realistic.
What's the color comparison to a DVX200?
It's going to have more color information than DVX200 because the DVX200 doesn't debar like we do. There's no question about that. The DVX200 has other benefits, but not in color.
There's a question here in the back.
The colors on that camera?
On the requirements for the SD cards when you shoot 4K, can you explain what cards would you recommend?
Okay, so the minute this ships the end of March, you'll want to use a U3 card because that's the minimum write speed we need for 4K at up to 150 megabits per second. In the summer when we launched the new all-intra codecs, they will require a V60 card. So that's the new standard. You'll never find a V60 card. I think it'll be highly unlikely. What you will find are V90 cards. It appears most companies are just going to jump over V60 and not bother producing them and going straight to V90. So V90 will be more than fast enough. That's our plan. We're doing a V90, and
how many gigs
Delkin has a V90 out now.
So what's the gigs going to be on that?
Initially 64 and 128 are what I'm seeing, but that'll be very quickly ramped up to 256 and 512. My understanding is 256 and 512 cards don't really sell real hot right now on the market because there's not a lot of need for that kind of capacity. I suspect that with V60 and V90 it'll ramp up pretty quickly with those larger and faster.
What would be the price on a card like that?
I can't really say because I don't know if they carry any cards here or not. I don't know what they carry for V60s or V90s. The ones I'm saying, if they carry the Delkin here, it's probably $100 for a 64 and $219 for a 128. Right around those prices is probably pretty close.
When you're shooting in stills, still images,
yes,
and since you have 2 slots, can you set one SD card for JPEG and one and the other for RAW?
Absolutely. You can do JPEG to one, RAW to the other, and then you can also do like 6K photo to one, and you can do video to the other.
Time lapse.
You can do time lapse to one, yeah.
The other advantage for this camera is 5-axis image stabilization. Can you give an example? Take the camera off the tripod and show an example.
Better yet, you want to walk around and try it, and then we'll play it back?
That sounds like that's a real test. Yeah.
I think everybody's gonna beat you up if you walk out with it. So.
That's the beta one, though.
Do you want 60p? You want 24p?
60.
How about with a manual focus prime?
I don't have one of those with me right now.
Huh? I've got one.
You really want to give somebody you don't know a chance to run around with your lens?
Yeah, sure.
What do you got?
It's a Sigma 15 or 1835. Cool. With metabones.
Oh, nice.
Because it's
Very
yours,
nice.
Anamorphic, that's a large step. Yeah. No.
How much is that metabone?
Now, so now we're jewels. What do you call it again? Oh,
I take no responsibility for your lens, just so you know.
Yeah, they work in tandem. So the body has image stabilization, and then the lens.
Okay.
No. First
Okay, I'm not going to use your lens because it's not a Canon. It's a Nikon, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't communicate to my body.
No, but it should still work in manual mode.
Okay, but I'm going to have to program it to 18 millimeter. You're not going to be able to zoom it.
You want to use my 7 to 14?
I'm still, you're saying I can't use that combination on that body?
You can, but you can't zoom with it.
I thought he was wanting to see image stabilization.
Yeah.
5 axis.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know he won't be able to zoom.
No, there's a zoom ring.
Okay. The system has to know the focal length of the lens for the 5-axis system to work.
Well, you
So
move it to
what I have to
18.
do right now is I have to
Oh,
put
I
it to 18,
You can't
then I have to do a
manually
mathematic calculation
alright,
because you have a speed booster on here. So it's not really an 18 anymore, it's now a half,
0.7.
it's like a 12.
Nah,
The point is that
10,
I'm not going to
10.
use it
It's
for
about
this specific
10.
demo because there's too much for me to do.
Okay.
It's not Nikon.
But if we used a Canon lens that could communicate with the body, it would.
My friend Joe.
Could it compensate with the speed boost?
I don't know.
Just use yours.
So, either that one or that one.
So is he shooting 60 frames or?
He's shooting 60 right now.
When you shoot 60 frames, do you play back on camera 24 or 30?
Hold on. Can you stop recording?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's on. I want to make sure my stabilization's on.
When you shoot the 60 60 frame, when you play it back on camera, do you see at 60 frames or 24 or
It'll be
30?
at 60. Well, it depends. If I put it in height, if I put it in VFR
Uh-huh.
and I shoot 60, it's going to conform to like 24
Whatever.
or 30.
Right, very
Okay.
But he's shooting true 60, so it's going to be
Okay.
shooting 60, conform to 60.
Right.
He's being really too gentle with that camera.
You can do.
Yeah, man. Go take it to
Shake
the
it.
ringer. Come on, man. We want to see that image stabilization.
Yeah, like buying on a
You do
bus.
60 is fine.
You know what you should do? Walk around with it. Like walk like
You
someone.
go
That's
down
what
to
you
the
should
parking
do.
lot and film.
Maybe not the parking lot. Keep it on this level.
Yeah.
Explain again.
My car's a Toyota Corolla. Just keep it to
Okay, so here's the issue. So everybody's asking why won't manual lenses work? Because I just made an
You
issue.
just went over it.
Okay. The camera has no way of knowing what your focal length of the lens is. You have to tell the camera every time you put a manual lens on. It's going to ask you, what's the focal length of this lens? Sure. So I would set it to like, if it's a 10 millimeter lens, I'd set it to 10. That's the true focal length, not your math conversions to 2. Ignore crop. It needs to know the actual focal length. Right. Well, you've just now added a piece of glass that's a 1.7. I don't even know which focal reducer it is. I don't know if you're using an XL. I don't know if you're using a standard Metabones. But that focal reducer, let's say it's a 0.7. My lens goes from being a 10
No, I understand.
now to being a 7 millimeter.
This is
So I would have to program. So I have to program into the camera that it is a 7 millimeter lens. And once I've done that, it'll stabilize.
Okay.
But you have a zoom lens. So that means that every time I change the focal length,
Yeah.
I have to then reprogram into the camera that the focal length has changed.
But you could
Hey, you wanna
have it
follow
at a known spot and then
Right,
program.
but I didn't know which speed booster you had. I have no idea if it's an XL and it's a 0.68 crop or it's
Well, this the way with all the calculations, it's 12.5 to 25.
okay. So if you'd like to try it after he gets back,
Yeah.
But for this test, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I didn't.
Now you had me worried that I couldn't
No,
use
no, no.
this.
You could absolutely use it.
Alright.
But let's say it was a. So let's say it's a Canon,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the speed booster. The Canons will communicate their focal length to my body. So I will know as you zoom a Canon that focal length is changing, it in real time will optimize the stabilization.
But you're still not sure if with the speed booster that would work with the
Yeah,
camera.
no idea.
Try it at 24. I want to see how it looks with
In the real world, right? That's how I would shoot 24 as
Yeah.
well. Because 24, you get more of a
You could really see the proof in the pudding at 24.
quick. A 60 is very smooth.
Yeah.
I'm really taking a risk. I have no idea what this guy's camera works with. Okay, we never hit the record button.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay, now you have to shake it out.
Next.
I had a good monologue going on too.
I'll just do a quick circle and we'll do 2 clips.
You wanna?
So I'm at ISO 6400 because I'm at a 60th of a second. And
I think
I can change that.
the test is walking around, like following the subject.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
It's recording. This is really terrific camera work.
Yeah.
That's how most of
Matt, you want to follow me around?
This will be enough. And then we'll pick on you. The most handsome man in the room. So
Can
we'll
you
go
do
ahead
that
and,
again at 24 so we can compare the difference?
Yeah. Good.
Sure, we can do that.
Definitely incorporate 24p. I'm on the face camera to go.
Ken, we're trying to. This would be probably worst case scenario for.
Yeah.
There's 24.
Is it 24?
Yeah. Whether or not it's in focus is a different topic entirely.
Yeah. I'm not talking about focus. We're just talking about stabilization.
And that's, I'm holding the camera pretty far over my head.
That's pretty good.